I want to share with you how, at 71, I believed my story was nearly over until one quiet afternoon in the park changed everything. My dear friends, before I begin, let me ask you something. Please write in the comments below where you are from and how old you are. It warms my heart to know the places and ages of the people who are listening to me. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this story. You know, when you reach 71, you carry so many memories that they almost spill out of you whenever you sit down with someone who cares to listen. But most of the time, there is no one who truly listens. That is the part that hurts the most, not the aching knees, not the blurry eyes, not even the sleepless nights. It's the silence in the house, the feeling that you are somehow invisible to the world. I live in a small apartment on the second floor of an old building. The walls are thin, and sometimes I hear the laughter of children from the neighbors downstairs. I do not mind. In fact, their noise keeps me company. I was a teacher for most of my life, so the sound of young voices has always been like music to me. But when the laughter fades, when the evening falls, I am left alone with the ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall. That sound, tick-tock, tick-tock, feels louder in the dark. I lost my husband many years ago. He was not an easy man, but he was mine. We had quarrels, yes, and sometimes secrets crept between us, those small lies that spouses tell each other when they are too tired or too afraid of the truth. But after he passed, I realized that even those quarrels and secrets were threads in the fabric of our life. And when he was gone, the fabric tore. For years, I tried to stitch it back together with memories, with photo albums, with old letters. Yet it never quite fit again. My children, two of them, live far away. One is in another state with her busy family, always rushing between work and grandchildren's school events. The other has built his life in a different city and calls me once every few weeks. I do not blame them. I raised them to be independent, to find their own paths. But sometimes when I sit by the window and watch the streetlights turn on one by one, I wish they would appear at my door just to sit with me and drink a cup of tea. It was on one of those afternoons, heavy with silence, that I decided to walk to the park. I often hesitated, you know. My legs do not always obey me, and the thought of stumbling in front of strangers is embarrassing. But that day, the walls of my apartment seemed to close, as if they were pressing against my chest. So I put on my old coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and took my cane. The air outside was crisp, filled with the scent of fallen leaves and the faint smoke from someone's fireplace. As I walked slowly along the path, I thought about how much my world had shrunk. Years ago, I traveled, I taught, I had classrooms filled with chatter and questions. Now my universe stretched no farther than the grocery store, the clinic, and the small park with its tired benches. I whispered to myself, almost as a prayer, "Is this all that is left for me?" The park was nearly empty that day. A few mothers with strollers, a man tossing a bowl to his dog, and some pigeons strutting as if they owned the place. I found my usual bench near the fountain, the one that always feels a little colder than the others, and I sat down carefully. My cane leaned against the wood, and I breathed in the stillness. The fountain's trickle was comforting, like a soft conversation in the background. I did not expect anything extraordinary. I did not believe in surprises anymore. At my age, most days follow the same pattern, like beads on a string. Yet life has a way of hiding gifts in the most ordinary corners. After a while, I noticed a man walking slowly along the path. He was tall, though a little stooped, and he carried himself with that mix of dignity and weariness that I recognized immediately it was the posture of age. He wore a dark cap pulled low, and his hands were tucked into the pockets of a worn jacket. He looked around as if searching for something, or perhaps for someone. Then, to my quiet surprise, he turned toward my bench. Now, I must confess, my first thought was not very generous. I worried, why here? There are plenty of benches. I had grown so used to my solitude that even the presence of a stranger felt like an intrusion. But I did not move. He approached, nodded politely, and asked in a gentle voice, "Is this seat taken?" I shook my head. "No, please sit down." And so he did. For For a moment, we simply shared the space in silence, listening to the fountain and the rustling leaves. It felt strange, yet oddly comforting. After a while, he spoke. "Beautiful day, isn't it? A little chilly, but clear." I smiled politely, answering the way one does with strangers. "Yes, it is. The air is good for walking." He nodded. Then another pause. I could sense that he was measuring his words, perhaps just as cautious as I was. Finally, he said, "I come here often. My doctor tells me I need the exercise, though my knees disagree." He gave a small chuckle, as if testing whether I would respond. I found myself smiling more genuinely this time. "Ah, I know that feeling. My legs argue with me every time I leave the house." That small exchange was enough to soften the air between us. We were no longer to strangers sitting side by side, we were to people acknowledging the same battle with time. There is a certain comfort in that, a recognition that you are not fighting alone. He introduced himself as John Peterson, 74 years old, a retired engineer. The name suited him, solid, practical, with a quiet strength. I told him my name, Elizabeth Than, and that I had been a teacher. His eyes lit up. "A teacher? Then you must have shaped many lives." I laughed softly. "I hope so, though at times it felt like they shaped me more than I shaped them." We talked a little longer about the trees, the fountain, the pigeons that strutted boldly between our feet. It was nothing extraordinary, just small talk. Yet I felt something stirring inside me, like a window opening in a stuffy room. I had forgotten what it was like to share even the simplest thoughts with someone new. When I finally rose to leave, he stood as well, leaning slightly on his cane. "Perhaps I'll see you here again," he said. "Perhaps," I answered, though inside I doubted it. Life had taught me not to expect too much. But as I walked home that evening, I noticed something different. The silence in my apartment did not feel quite so heavy. The clock still ticked, but its sound was less lonely. And when I made myself a cup of tea, I caught myself smiling at the memory of that brief conversation. Friends, I did not yet know how much that simple meeting would change me. I only knew that for the first time in a long while, I was looking forward to tomorrow. I thought it was just a passing encounter. But life had a different plan for me, my dear ones. You know how it is, we often think nothing will ever change, and then a single thread begins to pull, and the whole fabric of our days shifts. That is what happened after I met John. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The light through my curtains was soft, pale gold, and I lay there listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. Normally, I would linger in bed, reluctant to face another day of sameness. But that morning, I felt a curious restlessness. I thought about the park, about the fountain, about the way John's voice had sounded steady, kind, not rushed. It surprised me how vividly I remembered. I told myself, "Elizabeth, don't be foolish. It was just a conversation, nothing more." Yet, by the time I had made my tea, eaten my toast, and straightened the kitchen, I found myself reaching for my coat and scarf again. My cane waited by the door like a loyal friend. I hesitated, hand on the knob, feeling a flutter of nerves. What was I hoping for? That he would be there again. That we would talk once more. At my age, such hopes felt almost childish. And yet I went. The park was quieter that morning, a chill wind stirring the leaves. I walked slowly toward the fountain, trying not to expect anything. But there he was, sitting on the same bench, cap pulled low, gazing at the water as though it held answers to questions no one dared ask. When he noticed me, he smiled, and something inside me softened. He stood, a little stiffly, and said, "Good morning, Elizabeth. I was hoping you might come." Imagine that. Someone hoping for me. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I had not known in years. I sat beside him, and for a while we simply shared the quiet, the way old friends might. He asked me about my teaching, and I told him stories how children once made me laugh so hard I cried, how sometimes I saw in their eyes the struggles they carried from home. He listened intently, nodding, asking gentle questions. Then he shared his own tales, years spent building bridges, both real and metaphorical, in small towns and cities I had never seen. He spoke of machines and blueprints, but also of the pride he felt when something solid stood in place of empty air. I noticed the way his voice deepened when he spoke of his late wife, Margaret. She had been his companion for nearly 50 years, he said, before illness took her. As he mentioned her name, his eyes grew distant, as though he was gazing across time. She was the steady one, he said softly. I was always the dreamer. She kept my feet on the ground. I felt a pang in my heart then, not of jealousy, but of recognition. Loss is a language older people all understand. We do not need to translate, we simply feel. Do you miss her very much? I asked gently. Every day, he answered. But I also know she would be angry if I spent all my days grieving. She used to tell me life doesn't stop until it does. Don't waste it staring at the clock. He gave a small smile. Sometimes I hear her voice in my head pushing me to keep moving. His words lingered with me. They were not grand declarations, but truths carved out of years of living. From that day, our meetings became a quiet rhythm. Not arranged, not spoken aloud, but understood. Every few days we would both appear at the park, usually near the fountain, sometimes at another bench when the sun was strong. We did not always speak much. Sometimes we simply sat, sharing the silence. Other times we wandered slowly down the paths, two figures moving at the pace of memory. I found myself telling him things I had not told anyone in years. How lonely I felt at night. How sometimes I questioned whether I had been a good mother, a good wife. How guilt sat heavy on me, guilt for mistakes long past. He never judged. He only listened with that patient stillness that felt like a blessing. He, too, shared pieces of himself. He confessed his fear of becoming useless, of fading into the background. When I was younger, he said, people depended on me. I fixed things. I solved problems. Now I ask myself, what am I good for anymore? I reached out then, almost without thinking, and touched his hand. You're good for this, I whispered. For conversation, for companionship, for reminding someone like me that we are still alive. His hand did not move away. It rested beneath mine, warm and trembling slightly. That moment stretched between us, delicate as glass. But, friends, I must also tell you about the doubts that crept in. At night, alone in my apartment, I would question myself. Elizabeth, what are you doing? At your age, is this love or simply a fear of being alone? Will people laugh if they see you together? Will your children understand? Memories of old wounds stirred as well. Long ago, my husband had once broken my trust with a lie. Not a dramatic betrayal, but enough to plant suspicion in me. That shadow had followed me all these years. And now, as I began to feel something tender toward John, that old fear whispered, what if you open your heart and it breaks again? Yet, every time I returned to the park and saw him waiting, the fear softened. My steps felt lighter, my days less gray. Even my small apartment seemed brighter, as though his presence lingered in the corners. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of rose, he turned to me and said, Elizabeth, do you ever think about how strange it is that we are here, two old souls, meeting like this so late in life? I laughed softly. Strange, yes, but also perhaps just in time. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes kind, searching. Perhaps just in time, he repeated. That night, as I closed my curtains, I whispered a small prayer of thanks. For the first time in many years, I was not waiting for the clock to run out. I was waiting for tomorrow. Yet, with every step closer, I felt old fears and questions rise inside me, my dear friends. The weeks that followed were both gentle and unsettling. Gentle, because each meeting with John was like a small gift. Unsettling, because my heart, my old, stubborn heart, was awakening, and with it came doubts I thought I had buried long ago. We began to share more of our routines. If the morning was bright, we walked together through the park, slow but steady, like two trees leaning toward each other after standing apart for too long. If the afternoon was chilly, we would sit and speak of books or watch the children play near the swings, their laughter carrying like birdsong through the air. Sometimes we would speak of nothing at all, simply letting silence stretch, safe in each other's presence. But as you know, my dear ones, closeness brings vulnerability, and vulnerability awakens both joy and fear. One day, John asked about my children. I hesitated. It was not that I didn't love them, of course I did, but our relationship had not been simple. My son lived far away, busy with his own family, his own life. My daughter, though closer in distance, often seemed far in spirit. We spoke on the phone, yes, but she rarely visited. Perhaps she found it painful to see me aging, or perhaps she simply had no time. They call when they can, I said quietly, staring at the fountain's rippling surface. But sometimes I feel like a book that has been read too many times, placed back on the shelf and forgotten. John's brow furrowed. That must be hard. I nodded. It is. And yet, I remind myself they have their own burdens. It is not fair to cling too tightly. Still, loneliness can be sharp. He sighed. I understand. My daughter, Susan, lives in another state. She calls every Sunday without fail. But it is not the same as having her nearby. My son, well, he and I don't speak much anymore. There were disagreements, things I wish I couldn't do. For a moment, I saw a shadow cross his face, a weight of regret, and something in me softened even more. To know he, too, carried the ache of distance, it made me feel less alone in my own sorrow. But that night, lying awake in bed, I thought of my children. What would they say if they knew I was spending so much time with John? Would they worry, disapprove? Would they think I was being foolish or even disloyal to their father's memory? Those thoughts circled me like restless birds. Another evening, as the sun dipped low, John and I spoke of trust. It began innocently. He mentioned how, in his years as an engineer, trust was everything. You had to trust the calculations, the materials, the people working by your side. A single error could cost lives. I listened, then murmured, "Trust is not always easy." He turned toward me, puzzled. "Do you mean in people?" "Yes," I said softly. My hands trembled slightly as I folded them in my lap. Long ago, my husband, he told me something that was not true. It was not a great betrayal, but it shook me. And though we lived together many years after, I never fully silenced the doubt. That doubt has followed me even now. Sometimes I wonder if I know how to trust at all. John was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "I suppose we all carry scars. Some seen, some unseen." I looked at him, searching his eyes. "And do you? Do you carry such scars?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. When my wife grew ill, there were times I was not as patient as I should have been. I told myself I was tired, overworked, but the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of losing her, afraid of watching her fade. I snapped at her once or twice when she needed tenderness instead. I regret that more than anything." The honesty in his voice pierced me. It was not a confession meant to earn sympathy, but a truth spoken simply, openly. In that moment, I realized we were the people shaped by regrets, by mistakes, by wounds, and yet we were still here, still capable of reaching for connection. But, my dear ones, not every day was so peaceful. One afternoon, I arrived at the park and found John already deep in conversation with a woman I did not know. She was perhaps a few years younger than us, dressed neatly, her laugh light and familiar. I felt a sharp, surprising sting of jealousy. At my age, I had not expected to feel such a thing again. I slowed my steps, my cane tapping against the stones, and for a moment I considered turning back. "Elizabeth, don't be ridiculous," I scolded myself. "He is free to speak with whomever he pleases." But my heart was not so reasonable. When John noticed me and waved, his face lighting up, the sting eased but did not vanish. I sat with them, joined their talk, but a small voice inside whispered, "What if you are only one of many companions? What if you are not as special to him as he is becoming to you?" That night, I could not sleep. I turned over old fears like stones in my hands. Too late, too fragile, too foolish. The words circled me. And yet, the next morning, when I opened my curtains, the light seemed softer, more inviting. And I thought of John's smile, the warmth in his eyes. I realized that fear was only the shadow of longing. If I had not begun to care, I would not feel this way at all. So I whispered to myself, Elizabeth, do not run away. Not this time. Let yourself feel. The next time I saw John, I told him quietly, you are becoming important to me. My voice shook, but my words were clear. He looked at me, surprised, then took my hand. And you to me? It was simple, and yet it felt like a door had opened inside my chest. But no journey of love is without storms, and ours soon faced its first. My dear friends, after that quiet moment by the fountain, something shifted between us. Our walks felt different, more tender, more purposeful. I found myself humming in the mornings, eager to see him. Even the sparrows outside my window seemed livelier, as though they sensed my heart's awakening. But joy rarely comes without its shadow. One Sunday, as I prepared a simple soup in my small kitchen, the phone rang. It was my daughter, Anna. Her voice, brisk as always, carried both affection and impatience. Mother, she said, a neighbor told me she's seen you often with a man in the park. Is this true? The spoon in my hand trembled. I had not yet spoken to her about John. Not because I meant to hide it, but because I did not know how to explain it. How does one tell their grown children that love has come knocking again at 71? Yes, I said softly. His name is John. He is kind. We walk together, we talk. A pause stretched on the line. Then Anna's voice, sharp. Mother, don't you think this is a little irresponsible? At your age, what do you even know about this man? Her words pierced me. Irresponsible. Was it foolish, then, to seek companionship, to let my heart feel alive again? Anna, I replied, steadying my breath, I know enough. He is honest, gentle. He listens. She sighed heavily. I just don't want you to get hurt, or taken advantage of. There are people who prey on women like you. Women like me? The phrase burned, as if age had turned me into a fragile object incapable of choosing wisely. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the soup cooling on the stove. Doubt crept in. Was she right? Was I foolish? The next time I saw John, I carried that heaviness with me. He noticed at once. Elizabeth, he said gently, something troubles you. I hesitated, then told him of Anna's call. For a moment, pain flickered across his face. I see, he murmured. She worries for you? That is natural. Yes, I admitted. But her words, they made me question myself. Whether I deserve this joy. Whether it is real. John looked at me with such sorrow as if my doubt wounded him too. Then he said quietly, Elizabeth, I cannot erase her fears. But I can promise you this, I seek nothing but your company, your friendship, your laughter. If ever you ask me to step away, I will. But until then, I will walk beside you as long as you allow. His words touched me deeply. They were not grand declarations, but steady, humble. The kind of words one can lean on. Still, the seed of doubt remained. Not long after, another storm came. John's daughter, Susan, visited from out of state. He invited me to meet her at the park bench where we often sat. I was nervous would she welcome me, or view me as an intruder. Susan was polite, her smile courteous, but her eyes measured me carefully. After a few pleasantries, she asked directly, So, Elizabeth, how long have you and my father known each other? Some weeks, I answered. And you meet often? Yes, I said, keeping my voice calm. Her lips tightened. My father is vulnerable these days. I hope you understand that. I nodded, though my chest ached. Vulnerable. The word echoed Anna's warnings. Was that all others saw in us to fragile souls teetering toward disaster? After Susan left, John sighed heavily. She means well, but she doesn't understand. I touched his hand. Nor does Anna. Perhaps it is hard for children to imagine their parents as human, still longing, still capable of love. He squeezed my hand, grateful, yet I saw the worrying in his eyes. For several days after, I avoided the park. I told myself I was tired, that the weather was too cold. But, in truth, fear had wrapped itself around me again. What if they are right? What if we are clinging to something foolish? And then, one evening, as I sat by my window watching the street lamps glow, a memory returned to me of my husband's funeral years ago. I had stood by the grave, my children at my side, and thought, that is it. The chapter is closed. There will be no more great joys, only quiet endurance. And yet here I was, years later, with a heart that had proven me wrong. Was I truly going to shut the door again because others could not understand? The next morning, I wrapped my scarf around my shoulders and walked to the park. My steps were slow, my heart faster. John was there, waiting, his cane beside him, his eyes scanning the path as though hoping, yet doubting, that I would come. When he saw me, his whole face lit. I sat down, breathless, and whispered, "Forgive me for staying away." I let fear guide me again. He shook his head. "There is nothing to forgive. We are both learning." I looked at him steadily. "Then let us keep learning together, no matter what others think." For a long moment, we simply held each other's gaze. And in that quiet, I felt something stronger than doubt, resolve. Yes, storms had come. And yes, more might follow. But I had walked through too many years of silence to surrender now. Yet love in late life is never without trials, and soon we faced one we could not ignore. My dear friends, after that morning when I returned to the park, John and I grew closer in ways words can barely capture. We did not need grand gestures. It was in the little things, the way he saved the crust of his sandwich for the pigeons because he knew I liked to watch them gather, the way I carried an extra scarf in my bag in case the wind turned cold for him. Love, I realized, is stitched from such small threads. Yet life has its way of reminding us how fragile we are. One chilly afternoon, as the trees stood bare and the first frost rimmed the benches, John winced as he rose from his seat. His hand gripped his cane tighter than usual, his face pale. "John?" I asked, alarmed. He tried to smile. "Just a twinge. My heart plays tricks sometimes." But I saw the truth in the tremor of his hand. Fear rushed through me. The memory of my husband's last days, the hospital corridors, the machines, it all flooded back. "Please," I whispered, "let us sit. Tell me honestly." He sank back down, breath unsteady. "It has happened before. The doctors give me tablets. They tell me to be careful. But sometimes I forget that I am not the man of 50 I still feel inside." Tears pricked my eyes. "And you did not tell me." His gaze softened. "Elizabeth, I did not want to frighten you away. I wanted these walks to be light, filled with laughter, not shadowed by medicine bottles." I reached for his hand, holding it tight. "John, you must never hide your truth from me. If we are to walk this path, we must walk it fully, shadows and all." He looked at me long, and in his eyes I saw both sorrow and relief. That evening, I could not sleep. I sat by my window, staring at the quiet street, and thought of the cruel irony. Just as I had opened my heart again, fate threatened to snatch it away. Part of me whispered, "Step back now, before the grief grows too heavy." But another voice answered, firm, "Would you rather live in fear of pain or taste the sweetness that has returned to you?" The next morning, I made a decision. I cooked a small basket of food, fresh bread, cheese, and apples, and walked to John's apartment, something I had never done before. My hands trembled as I knocked. He opened the door, surprised. "Elizabeth," I smiled, holding up the basket. "If your heart insists on reminding you of your age, then I will remind you of life. May I come in?" His eyes glistened as he stepped aside. It was the first time I saw his home. Modest, tidy, filled with old photographs and books stacked on every surface. A worn armchair by the window, a blanket neatly folded. It felt warm, lived in, yet achingly lonely. We shared the meal at his small table. At one point, I touched a photo on the shelf, John as a young man in uniform, his late wife beside him, both smiling. "She was beautiful," I said softly. He nodded, his face tender. "She was my anchor for many years. Losing her, it broke me in ways I thought I could never mend." He paused, then looked at me. "Until you." My throat tightened. I, too, had loved and lost. In that moment, it felt as if the broken pieces had found a way to fit together. After that day, something shifted. We no longer lingered only in the park. Sometimes I visited his home, sometimes he came to mine. We read aloud from books, played old records, even argued gently about whose tea was stronger. It was a companionship both ordinary and extraordinary. But fate tested us again. One evening, John did not appear at the park. I waited, pacing the path, my scarf pulled tight. At last, I hurried to his apartment, knocking anxiously. It was his neighbor who answered, her expression grave. He was taken to the hospital this afternoon. Chest pains. The world tilted. I rushed there at once, my heart pounding. When I found him in the sterile white room, he lay pale but awake, wires attached to his chest. His eyes lit when he saw me. "Elizabeth," he whispered. I clasped his hand, tears spilling. "Why didn't you call me?" He smiled faintly. "Because I knew you would come anyway." In that moment, I understood something vital. Love in old age is no less fierce than in youth. Perhaps it is fiercer because it knows the value of each moment, the fragility of each breath. I stayed by his side that night, listening to the rhythmic beep of the monitor, my fingers entwined with his. For once, I was not afraid of the nurse's raised eyebrows, nor of what our children might think. All that mattered was that he was here, that I could hold his hand while I still had the chance. At dawn, he turned to me, his voice weak but sure. "Elizabeth, if this is to be the last chapter of my life, then I am grateful. Because you are in it." My tears fell freely. "No, John, this is not the last chapter. It is the beginning of one neither of us expected, and we will live it, day by day, together." He smiled, closing his eyes, and in that quiet dawn I made a vow to myself I would not waste another day hiding or doubting. However long we had months, years, it would be ours. Those days in the hospital were among the longest of my life. Every beep of the machine, every shuffle of nurses' shoes in the hallway felt like a reminder of how fragile our time was. Yet, strangely, I was not paralyzed by fear. Instead, I felt a quiet determination, as if love itself had steadied my heart. John improved little by little. Each day his voice grew stronger, his color brighter. Soon the doctor said he could return home, though with careful rest. I remember helping him dress, his hand trembling as he buttoned his shirt, and I smiled. "Slowly, John," I said. He chuckled. "You sound like my nurse." "I will be the sternest nurse you've ever had," I replied, and he kissed my hand with a gratitude that said more than words. When we returned to his apartment, I cooked soup and fussed over him like a mother hen. He teased me, but I saw how much he cherished the care. It struck me then how often, at our age, we are forced to become the caregivers of others, yet we rarely allow ourselves to be cared for. And oh, how sweet it felt to share that burden with someone who understood. Still, one shadow lingered, our children. Mine still called with worried tones, urging me to think carefully, while his daughter remained distant, skeptical of my intentions. It hurt, of course, but we decided to face it openly. One Sunday, I invited them both, his daughter and my son, to tea at my apartment. My hands shook as I laid the table, fearing conflict. But John, sitting beside me, squeezed my fingers. "We tell the truth and let love speak for itself," he said. They arrived awkwardly, coats in hand, suspicion in their eyes. The first minutes were stiff, full of polite words and long silences. Finally, John cleared his throat. "I know you worrying," he said softly, "but I want you to see with your own eyes. Elizabeth and I are not lost children chasing dreams. We are two souls who have known loss and loneliness. We have chosen to walk together not for wealth, not for foolish fantasy, but for companionship. That is all." I added gently, "We don't want to replace anyone or disrupt your lives. We only ask for your blessing or at least your understanding." There was silence. My son looked at me with tender sadness. "Mother, I was afraid you would be hurt again. But seeing you here, I realize I have not seen you smile like this in years." Tears welled in my eyes. John's daughter was quieter. She looked at her father, studied his face, and at last whispered, "I was afraid she would take you away from me. But perhaps she has given you back instead." That afternoon, as the four of us sat around the table, the tension slowly melted. There was not full acceptance, not yet, but there was a crack in the wall, and through it light entered. After they left, John and I sat in silence, both of us shaken. Then he whispered, "Perhaps it is never too late for hearts to soften." From that day, we lived more openly. We no longer hid our walks or our laughter. Neighbors began to nod kindly, even smile at the sight of us arm in arm. Some whispered, "Of course people always do," but it no longer mattered. Our lives became stitched together with small rituals, a daily crossword, a walk to feed the birds, a shared reading of the Psalms on quiet evenings. When he tired, I read aloud. When my knees ached, he offered his arm. We were not young lovers rushing headlong into passion. We were older, slower, gentler, but in that gentleness lay a depth I had never known before. And yes, there were hard days too. Days when pain woke him in the night, or when I felt the heavy silence of the empty house once he left. But those days only deepened my gratitude for the good ones. We learned to measure time not in years, but in moments. A shared joke, a hand held, a tear wiped away. One spring evening, as blossoms returned to the trees where we first met, John turned to me on the bench and said quietly, "Elizabeth, do you realize? We have been given a second youth. Not in our bodies, perhaps, but in our souls." I laughed through tears. "Yes, John, our second spring." He leaned close, his voice tender. "Then let us live it fully until the last petal falls." And so, my dear friends, that is the story I wish to share with you. Not a tale of fairy tale endings or endless health, but of courage, tenderness, and the miracle of companionship found when one least expects it. If you are listening to me now and your heart feels lonely, please remember, it is never too late. Not too late to smile again, not too late to hold a hand, not too late to open your heart. Love may not come to all, but hope, friendship, and warmth they can visit at any age, if only we keep our hearts unlocked. So let us not bury ourselves before our time. Let us wear our years with pride and still dare to laugh, to dream, and yes, to love. If you liked this story, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the following story, click on the window on the left. Thanks for watching.